No matter who wins the coming federal election, Canada's next government is going to have to deal with Justin Trudeau's Senate. That shouldn't be a problem if Mark Carney's Liberals win, who will find many partisan and ideological allies in Parliament's appointed upper house. But even with a supermajority of seats in the House of Commons, the Conservatives could find their agenda blocked by Trudeau appointees for well more than a decade. Trudeau has appointed 93 so-called independent senators over the course of his premiership. Of that, 85 still sit in the Senate. Importantly, every single one of them ranges in ideological orientation from center-left to radical left. A few of them have shown some moderate independence from Liberal Party discipline, but most have not. That is 85 of 105 seats directly appointed by Justin Trudeau, in addition to several more appointed by Liberal Prime Ministers predating Stephen Harper. To finally outnumber the Trudeau senators, the Conservatives would need to win every single election for many, many years to come. Meanwhile, the cost to Canada would be parliamentary obstruction by unelected appointees, many hundreds of billions in wasted tax dollars, and untold more in missed economic opportunities. Much cheaper and more democratic would be to simply bribe them all to retire. Give them however much money it will take to ease the current crop of senators into a very wealthy, taxpayer-funded sunset. There are a few ways that this could be done, but here's my proposal to buy them off. To start, senators can earn up to 75% of their salary in pensionable earnings, normally requiring roughly 25 years of service. Some senators will be close to this amount, but most will still be a ways off. Some will hit the mandatory retirement age of 75 before they max out their pension. Forget all that actuarial mumbo-jumbo. Just give them their full pension of 75% of their salary immediately if they retire right now. For a relatively young senator of 50 years, that would be worth $6.2 million. But for younger senators earning an average salary of $178,000 per year, a mere 75% of that in pension earnings might not be shiny enough. That's why, in addition to their pensions, they should also continue to be paid their full salary from the date of their retirement until their death. For a 70-year-old senator already nearing mandatory retirement, that would be worth $2.7 million if they lived until the age of 85. For a younger senator of 50 years, that'd be worth about $6.2 million. But wait, there's more! To really push them over the edge and put real, cold, hard Canadian cash in their hands right away, we should put something really shiny in the window that they can have right now. Perhaps $1 million unsigning bonus, maybe even $2 million, whatever it takes. We could even pay them in American dollars if that'll help. It would be more than worth it to taxpayers and to the democratic system. The average senator right now is 67 years old. And if they live to 85, we have to pay them their salary and full pension for 18 years. So that's a rough total cost to the taxpayer of $312,000 per year per senator, or $32 million per year if the entire Senate takes the bribe. That works out to a total of $589 million if every senator serving right now lives to the age of 85. Together with the $1 million one-time unsigning bonus, the total cost of the Canadian taxpayer will be a grand total of $600 million. Hell, I don't care how we do it. As expensive as it would be, the cost would be at least partially defrayed by the pension, benefits, and salary that we already have to pay them already if we continue with business as usual. Now, some of you poor working stiffs may blush at such an extravagant severance package. Some of you may even think that I'm being facetious. I'm not. If Canada elects a Conservative government in a month or so, it will be endlessly obstructed for many years to come by the Trudeau senators. A Conservative government will be forced to water down their program until it is acceptable to the Liberal Senate. That will cost taxpayers many, many times more than the $600 million it would take to bribe them all into voluntary retirement. As wretched as the medicine may taste going down, Canadian taxpayers and the citizenry would be much better for it. All right, well, I'm going to continue past that rant there and talk to a few senators about this. Later on, I'm going to talk to conservative Senator Scott Tanis. He is one of the very few, perhaps he might be the only one left, democratically elected senators currently serving, of course, from Alberta. Alberta is the only place in Canada that holds democratic elections for the Senate. So first up, we have Alberta Senator Paula Simons. She was appointed by former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau several years ago. So I'm pleased to bring her into the show. She might be, I think it's, she'll call me on it if it's not fair, but I think it's fair to say she's on the more progressive side of things. But she is one of the few who has, from time to time, shown a bit more independence than many other members of the Senate. So welcome, Senator Simons. Thank you for joining us.
Good to see you, Jarek. I have to say, I did have the chance to listen to your little opening talk. And it's funny. I mean, I understand why people might feel that way. But there are two things I need to say off the top. Yeah. Senators, first of all, especially this current crop of senators, tend to be all type A overachieving workaholics. The last thing any of us wants to do is retire early with a golden diamond studded parachute. The other thing is senators generally come in two flavors. There are senators who have been hugely successful in their professional financial lives, and they don't need extra money. I think for some of them, our Senate salary is kind of like an honorarium. And then you get senators like me, who've spent our lives earning not very much money, whether we're working in the not-for-profit sector or in my case, as a journalist. And we do the work for free because we're not motivated by money. So I don't think buying us off would work. It also won't work constitutionally. In 2014, Stephen Harper, when he was prime minister, asked the Supreme Court specifically in a reference case what it would take to abolish the Senate. And the answer for the Supreme Court was clear. To abolish the Senate would require the unanimous consent of all 10 provinces, so all the provincial legislatures would have to vote in favor. The House of Commons would have to vote in favor, and the Senate would have to vote in favor. So even if you gave me $1 zillion million, and even if I wanted $1 zillion million, you can't just put us all out to pasture. Mm-hmm. And what would I do with my time? I would have to go back to being a reporter like you. It would. It's a fun thought experiment, and I will tell you that people all across the political spectrum, not just Western Standard audiences, but the Democrats have believed for generations in the abolition of the Senate. It's just that it's much more easily said than done.
Well, I'm not actually proposing the abolition of a Senate. I think a federation, a genuine federation, needs an upper house, although I think the structure of it needs to be radically overhauled, beginning with the seat count. Alberta, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, has 6 senators,
yes,
which is barely more than half of New Brunswick, which has a tiny fraction of the population of Alberta.
This is a problem. I mean, British Columbia has 6 senators, and Nova Scotia has 10.
Yeah,
I'm enough of an Alberta girl to agree with you absolutely that British Columbia and Alberta in particular don't have a fair representation in the Senate, which is the problem. If you try to make it equal, if you try to make it effective and elected without making it equal, mm-hmm. It would actually be to the detriment of Western Canada.
I strongly agree with you on that point. So I'm actually not, perhaps I didn't say it clearly in my opening rant there. I'm not proposing to abolish the Senate. I'm proposing to clear out voluntarily.
You just want to cull us. Okay.
Cull. Voluntarily. I don't expect every single one would take it, but I would imagine a younger senator. That puts a whole new career path in front of them with a lot of money to work with.
We actually quite like the job because we take the job because we take the job seriously. We don't like the job because of the salary. We like the job because we take seriously our responsibility to hold every single piece of government legislation up to nonpartisan scrutiny. And I think it's really important to say that of the current crop of senators, out of 105, only 12 belong to a partisan party. You had mentioned earlier that you'd be speaking to my friend and colleague, Scott Tanis. You called him a conservative senator. That's not true. Scott crossed the floor to form his own independent Senate group the Canadian Senators Group, which is a small C conservative, maybe, slightly red-tinged Tory group. But they are not part of the Conservative caucus. They are not whipped by the Conservative leader. And Scott takes his independence with tremendous pride. And I would say he's done as much as anyone to ensure the reform of an independent Senate full of senators who do not walk a party line.
Okay, you are correct that the vast majority of senators no longer belong to a capital L liberal caucus or a
capital C conservative
caucus. That's also extremely small. But I think you probably wouldn't disagree with me that the prime ministers tend to appoint senators that even if they're on paper independent, and even if they act somewhat independently, you've questioned me before a Senate committee. I know you take your job seriously, and you're not towing a partisan line. But I think you would probably agree it's fair to say you're on the progressive side of things. And Justin Trudeau's appointments have been people who have some ideological affinity on the progressive side. Stephen Harper's appointments outside of Alberta have tended to be, for the most part, ideologically conservative. In Alberta, he's gone from the list of recommended appointees from the consultative elections that Alberta holds. So, yes, they're not, like me, I'm not a partisan conservative, but ideologically, philosophically, I'm pretty small C conservative. And I think it's fair to say that the current Senate is very overwhelmingly on the progressive side of things.
Yeah, I mean, so the two things I want to say about that. Prime Minister Trudeau was prime minister for almost 10 years. And as you've said, when any prime minister is in power for that long, he or she tends to appoint people who, with whom they have some political affinity. And I think it is fair to say that Prime Minister Trudeau appointed quite a few conservatives, but the conservatives he appointed were progressive conservatives.
They're not even recognizably conservative. I might be on the very conservative side, but they're not even vaguely recognizably conservative to most conservatives today.
I think senators like David Richards and Rob Black and Charles Adler might disagree with that.
I don't know. Okay, Charles Adler was a conservative at some point, but he had some Damascus moment. I don't think anyone in the country would consider Charles Adler to be a conservative today. And not just in the partisan sense. I have all sorts of issues with, and had my fights with conservative politicians, but I was still always a small C conservative. Charles Adler, no one would actually consider Charles Adler to be a conservative today, who at least among self-identified conservatives.
Well, if you look at the appointees from Alberta, Prime Minister Trudeau appointed Patty Labakan Benson and Karen Sorensen, both of whom were card-carrying Alberta progressive conservatives.
Yeah, we both know that party back in its heyday included people clearly on the left as well. Like, it had Alison Redfords, all of that. I don't want to quibble on the details of every single person, but he's not been appointing actual conservatives.
He's not been appointing people as conservative as you.
Well, no one would appoint someone as conservative as me, to be fair. Pierre Poilievre would not appoint someone as conservative as me.
So, I mean, the real question is, how can you make the Senate useful? And I think you ask a fair question in your introduction, which is to say, if Pierre Poilievre wins the election, and I think, on the day I'm talking to you, it's about a 50-50. It's certainly not the lock it appeared to be in December. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's much more up in the air. But I think there's still an even chance that Pierre Poilievre could form the next government. And then the real legitimate question will be for the Senate, all right, most of you were appointed by Justin Trudeau. How do you handle it if legislation comes before you with which you are ideologically opposed? And there's an interesting historical precedent for this. It's called the Salisbury Convention. It's what sort of binds the British House of Lords not to defeat legislation that comes from Labour governments. And in Canada, we have largely adopted the premise of the Salisbury Convention, which is that if a Pierre Poilievre government is formed and they put legislation before the Senate, we will, for the large part, have to hold our nose and pass it. We might amend it. We might push back. We might make speeches opposing things. But at the end of the day, we do not have the moral or political or democratic authority to block legislation on which a conservative prime minister, whether it's Pierre Poilievre or perhaps a conservative prime minister in the future, has campaigned. So the Salisbury Convention says, if you put something in your platform and you get a mandate to enact that platform, the unelected Senate cannot block you just because we don't like it. The question that is more complicated comes if the legislation is unconstitutional or violates the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Well, that's
And
where
there's
I wanted to go next.
Yeah.
One of your colleagues, I can't remember the name off the top of my head,
Peter
has
Harder.
said that, yes, says that the Senate should block any legislation that would include the notwithstanding clause. Now, whatever anyone thinks of the notwithstanding clause, it is a part of the Constitution. It is by definition a constitutional tool. That would seem to fly in the face of the Salisbury Convention. And because the Salisbury Convention is a convention, and conventions are a very important part of our Westminster system, but the weak part of conventions, especially when we have a mixed written and unwritten system like in Canada, is the unwritten parts, the convention parts. They tend to get bent when it's convenient by people on both sides of the aisle. Both sides of the aisle are guilty of sin of that. How confident are you that the Salisbury Convention would remain a solid convention, a part of our effective Constitution in this case, especially if, say, Pierre Poilievre brought forward a piece of legislation that invoked the notwithstanding clause on, say, I don't know, mandatory minimum sentences for something in the criminal code?
Yeah, preemptively.
Yes.
So this is, which has never been done before. So this is where Peter Harder and I have had some interesting discussions. I mean, Senator Harder is a huge proponent of the Salisbury Convention. He's not a fan of the notwithstanding clause. I come from Alberta, and because I am 60 years old, in case you were wondering.
I wasn't asking, ma'am.
No, but you were talking about a young senator at 50 and an old senator at 70, and I'm right in the middle. But I remember Peter Lougheed, and I remember the genesis of the notwithstanding clause. And so I spoke to Peter Harder's motion in the Senate, and I said, look, I don't think we should adopt a motion that says we will absolutely vote to defeat any piece of legislation that preemptively invokes the notwithstanding clause, because I can imagine a scenario in which a government, conservative or liberal, might be well within its sort of practical rights to invoke the notwithstanding clause, especially if a Supreme Court decision is sort of, way out of bounds. But I think there would be some circumstances in which something was so egregious that, it's one of those moments, Derek, where you and I have these funny moments where we agree because we're both libertarians at heart. I think you and I could both imagine something that a government of whatever stripe could invoke, that you and I might agree the Senate should defeat that. So I think that you keep your options open and your powder dry. I think that's the Canadian way.
So I think there's some pretty big exceptions to the Salisbury Convention. The most notable was, I think, in the very early 1990s, when the Senate, by a one-vote margin, essentially on a tie, I think may have been broken by the Speaker, on replacing Canada's abortion legislation.
In 1991. And people like to say that Conservative Senator Pat Carney was the deciding vote. I mean, technically that's not true, but I think because she was a recently appointed Conservative senator appointed by the Mulroney government, having been a Mulroney cabinet minister, the fact that she voted to maintain freedom of choice for Canadian women and the freedom for Canadian women to control their own bodies is an excellent example of a libertarian use of the Senate to defend our civil rights and freedoms.
Okay, but abortion's largely off the political menu today. But in 1991, it was hotly debated. It had been, the existing legislation had been struck down by the Supreme Court. And I don't want to make this a topic about abortion. This is about the Salisbury Convention and the application of the Canadian Senate.
But I would say that this
it was not a matter that was decisively considered. This is a fundamental human rights. A large block of Canadians believe that, but a very large block also believed that it was a human right to protect unborn. My point is, it was a matter of dispute. It was not a matter of broad public consensus at that time.
That's fair.
And the Senate intervened on a highly contentious political issue. Many of the votes against it actually were some of the hardline pro-life senators who thought the replacement legislation was too pro-choice on the other side. But the issue of it aside, this was not an issue where we had broad-based social consensus at the time. The Senate made a very clear decision on an ideological and partisan matter that was not clearly about broadly shared values around rights at that
And
time.
what I think is fascinating is if you look at the voting records, there were conservatives who voted in support of abortion, and there were liberals, I mean, devout Catholic liberals who voted against it. And I think this is a really interesting test case because this is long before Justin Trudeau amends the Senate to appoint independents, right? So this is back when the Senate was a partisan body, liberals and conservatives, and senators still voted their conscience and didn't necessarily vote the party line. So, I mean, that has happened exactly once in our lifetimes. Were you alive in 91? I was.
I'm not. I'd like to not have not been. I like to be younger, but no, I was around.
I mean, but I think
around.
I think it's the exception that proves the rule. I think the fact that it has happened exactly once shows that the Senate acts with restraint and acts with courageous prudence, which is kind of one of our mottos, to only do these things in very rare instances. So I think if people are expecting a huge constitutional crisis in the wake of a potential Poilievre election, I think they're going to be disappointed by how boring things actually turn out to be. All that said, who knows what's going to happen because, Canadian-American relations being what they are. I was in Ottawa earlier this week and I heard people talking about the possibility of a national unity government. And I said, in that case, the Senate will have to be at its most stringent. Because if we had a national unity government, then you get a tendency to groupthink and everybody says, oh, we have to do this. It's in that case that the Senate will have to be absolutely on its guard to protect civil liberties.
Yeah, there's a saying in the United States is bipartisanship is when both parties gang up and screw the people. So you have to be very careful when the parties are actually acting together. It's often when the parties are acting together. We like them to act together sometimes, but that's actually when we have to be most on guard against government overreach is when there's broad consensus among the major parties.
Well, exactly. And I think, I suspect that some of your Western Standard viewers and readers are fans of Donald Trump, and I suspect others of them are not. Or if they were in the past, they're not so enthused now. And we can see what happens in the United States when the Senate fails to do its job. And whatever you think about Donald Trump's program, I think there are a lot of principled conservatives who are waiting for Republican senators to say, okay, we agreed on this and this and this, but that is a bridge too far. And what I hope is that whoever becomes the next prime minister, whether Mark Carney wins or Pierre Poilievre wins, I am committed to holding that government to account. I am committed to taking every single piece of legislation apart, piece by piece, to ensure that we get the best governance. And Derek, because you've seen me in action in Senate committees, I don't pull my punches. And I think I have many Senate colleagues, no matter who wins, who will understand that their job is to protect the Charter and the Constitution and the democracy of Canada.
Well, we're on very different sides of things, but I know you are a honey badger of a senator and take your job very, very seriously.
I think if I'm in Alberta, I should be a Wolverine.
Oh, okay, Senator Wolverine. That's apt on a few levels there. I think that works.
And if you could arrange for Hugh Jackman to be on with me the next time, that would be even better.
Now I'm getting your angle. Now I see what you're coming at.
Yeah.
Okay. Shameless, but fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, I know you take your job seriously. I know you would just want to do it, period. But I'm going to be there with a $600 million bag when this election's over, and we'll see. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
When I turn 75 and retire, if you'd like to meet me with $600 million, in back of the railway station, I'd be cool with that too. No, don't say that. Senator Paula Simons does her job because she loves it. You and I have talked about this. I was a journalist.
We've already got you on the record. We already got you.
Now, I was a journalist for 30 years. We all know I would work for peanuts.
You know what? In this business, I do believe you must not be in it for the money. That's fair enough. Well, Senator, I really appreciate you being generous with your time and your insights today. Thank you very much for joining us.
Take care, Derek.
All right. I'm now going to be joined by Senator Tanis. I believe he is. He'll correct me if I'm wrong. I think he's a part of the Independent senators group. He was elected as a progressive conservative. He has the distinction of, let's bring him in now. He has the distinction of being the only elected member of the Canadian Senate right now. There's been a tradition going back, I think, to Stan Waters when he was elected under the Reform Party banner, circa 1991-ish. And the tradition started that at least conservative prime ministers would respect the Alberta consultative Senate elections and then appoint the winner of those elections. And that's continued on through conservative prime ministers with Alberta, at least. And so Scott Tanis was elected in 2012. In Alberta, we use provincial, at least sometimes we use provincial party banners to run under. He was elected under the Progressive Conservative banner in 2012. And then appointed by Prime Minister Stephen Harper to the Senate in 2013. With retirements, that makes him now the lonely last democratically elected senator in Alberta. All senators since then, including in Alberta where we've had elections since, have been ignored by Justin Trudeau, and he's just appointed his own people. So Senator Tanis, thank you very much for taking time to join us today.
Glad to be here.
All right. Well, before we get into my kind of cockamamie, diamond-encrusted severance package proposal for the Senate, I maybe want to get your thoughts on, how much of a challenge could the Senate be, both maybe in probability and even in more extreme cases, could the Senate be if in roughly a month's time, Canadians were to elect a conservative government in the House of Commons, even with a large majority. The Senate is currently now overwhelmingly Liberal appointed, if not Liberal in partisan name, at least Liberal appointed, not and ideologically left. How obstructionist could the Senate be if there happens to be a change in governing party?
Well, I think they could be quite obstructionist if they wanted to be. This is something that, especially over the last 6 months, has been on every senator's mind, because the wide assumption was that the Conservatives would form a large majority, and people had to think about how they were going to behave in that, and groups such as mine. And you mentioned Independent Senators Group, which is the largest group in the Senate. That's not my group. I, together with former Senator Doug Black and others, started the Canadian Senators Group. We're the second largest. We have 18 members, and we've been functioning together as a group since 2019. The point is that we've all talked about it, the different groups. We've talked about it as leaders, including the current leader of the opposition, and Don Plett from the Conservative Party, as well as the leader of the Independent Senators Group, and so on. I'm nervous about how this will play out, but I think that we will get into a rhythm with it that will be acceptable to the, if it were a conservative government, even one with a large majority and a sense of urgency to get things done. I think the Senate will respond appropriately. I mean, it might take a little longer than a similar bill would have taken, say, with Liberal government. But I think we'll get there, and I think most senators will use will respect the principle of that our job is, again, I'm the only elected, but everybody else is appointed, and everybody's pretty sensitive about that. That a government with a strong majority, a fresh majority, a fresh mandate, and an agenda. That needs to be respected, and that our job in those cases is likely simply to hear out, hold the hearings, have some debates on the record. If we see something that we think is helpful to what the government's trying to accomplish, or if we hear something in testimony that we think deserves a consideration of an amendment, we put those amendments forward, we send them to the House of Commons, and they either take them or they don't. And if they send them back not accepted, then I would expect that the Senate would very quickly then, say, okay, we've done our job. Let's pass the bill. It's going to be, you got to be a little bit of an optimist, but I've seen most of these senators in action, and we've got about 15 new ones over the last few months that I don't know much about. I've met a number of them, and I would count them to be, to be thoughtful, responsible people that would kind of follow along in that path. So I would say hold your idea in reserve, and let's see what happens.
Okay. Well, maybe now I'll ask you what you think of my idea. Let's set up a hypothetical, but not a wildly hypothetical here. I was talking, with Senator Simons about, when the House of Commons defeated the replacement legislation around abortion in 1981. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you about abortion itself, but that was a case where the Senate directly overrode and definitively overrode the will of the democratically elected and legitimate House of Commons. It occurs to me now that actually it's happened more than once. I'm not sure if it was outright defeated, but the free trade election of 1988, if my memory, if I'm getting this right, that was largely triggered because the Liberal senators would not pass the free trade bill and said, well, you should have an election on this. And to Brian Mulroney's benefit, he won that election. Yep. But the Senate has held up or outright defeated, and they can be effectively the same thing at the end of the day. They have done this before. It's not too often, but it has happened. We discussed also, there's a proposal among some of the leftist members of the Senate around, should they vote against anything with the notwithstanding clause, particularly preemptive use of it. Again, the notwithstanding clause is not unconstitutional. You can argue if it's a good use of it or not, but it is quite explicitly constitutional. It's in the Constitution. Yep. So there's concern around that, and I could certainly foresee a situation where a Poilievre-led conservative government could bring forward criminal justice legislation with certain mandatory minimum sentences, etc., that the Supreme Court has ruled unconstitutional, where you could see this. So, in a hypothetical situation, forget the actual content of it, but something along the lines of say free trade or notwithstanding clause, etc. If we had that and we ended up with logjam. You are the sole exception to the rule that they're appointed. But if we had that, what would be your how would you receive the idea of literally buying out the Senate with a severance package to essentially clear the place out, maybe not 100%, but most of it, so that new appointees could be made that are more likely to pass government legislation?
Well, I think before the government would get to something that far out and that expensive, there's a few things that can be done. There's a provision for a convention where representatives of both the Senate and the House of Commons meet and try and iron it out. That I don't think has ever been used, but it's there in the Constitution to be used in a case of a deadlock. So you're right. There have been rare occasions when for varying reasons, the Senate has done this. I think it's 3 times.
Yeah, but also the Senate's never been, unless I'm wrong, the Senate's probably never been this lopsided with appointments, not just from a single party, but a single man, because Trudeau inherited all of those vacancies from Harper. It's not like he's been there for just 9 years. It's like it's closer to like he's been there for 15. So it's never been this lopsided.
Yeah, very similar to the early days of Harper, where there were huge number of Liberals, not like this, clearly not like this. I mean, the Conservative caucus is down to 11 or 12. There are still, I would say, 8 or 10 other reliable conservative folks that actively and openly support conservative values. And then I would also say there's quite a number that genuinely believe in the independent thinking, but the deference to the will of the government in a popular mandate. So, I have difficulty. I got to say, Derek, I have difficulty thinking that we would ever, with the people that are there, get into that situation. These are not hardcore partisan people for the most part. They are genuinely people who applied, went through that process. I think your characterization of most of them and their ideological leanings is true. Not everybody by any means, but it's a different group than a bunch of partisan bagmen and failed candidates.
There are some now. There are some now. They got added in the last year where
there has been a change, a marked change, where I would say there were 5 or 6 that you could say were clear partisan people, but that's not enough to move the needle.
Yeah. Another way, you're more of an expert on how the Senate's going to the powers of the Senate than I am here, but another way I've considered on potentially breaking logjam is, as far as the way I understand it, the Senate cannot defeat a money bill.
That's correct.
What if
by convention, I believe, and it's a solid convention.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid. Some convention can be bent, and people on both sides will do that, as I was discussing with Senator Simons. But money bills can't be defeated. What if hypothetically, a conservative government put like a $1 spend in every single bill, regardless of if it could be it's renaming some mountain somewhere. There's some inconsequential bill, but you put $1 in it, it becomes a money bill. Technically, how would that then affect?
I think that's more likely. That is absolutely more likely to be where we're going to run into some kind of a confrontation. Omnibus legislation and this has been a trick that has been done going back to the Mulroney years, and every successive government has used it more and more, where they do a budget and then they have in the budget document an annex that says, hey, we're going to do these things. And then in addition, and then when they bring the operative bill for the budget called the Budget Implementation Act forward, it's effectively this thing that's got the budget and all of those items in it. Mm-hmm. And then it's got a whole raft of other things that have nothing to do with budget. Yeah. And governments, including the Trudeau government, was the worst offender of everybody, in spite of what they said when they got elected, that they would stop.
Well, what I'm proposing is perhaps the opposite of it. Not that I expect the new conservative government to stop using omnibus legislation. It's something, unfortunately, all the parties do. But doing the opposite, you have a standalone bill, and it's naming something Sri Lankan Commemoration Week. I don't know. It could be whatever the bill is, but adding $1 to it, giving the bill essentially giving the individual smaller pieces of non-omnibus legislation. You put like $1 into it, and then it goes to the Senate. Could the Senate then not defeat that bill if it's got a dollar attached to it?
Well, I don't think that's what's classified as a money bill. A money bill is around a budget or a fall economic statement. Those are the money bills that are talking. We get bills all the time that have dollars attached to it. Health bills, etc., daycare bills. All of those bills came with operative legislation, but the funding for that is contained usually in a government bill, in a budget bill.
Yeah, so if the funding for this was a part of the bill itself, is what I'm saying. Yeah. This would be a new beast, a new kind of legislative beast. I don't think that would pass muster with the convention that exists. But I think that where we do, I see a danger is in omnibus legislation, where everything gets thrown into, as Donald Trump calls it, one big beautiful bill, and then we're kind of stuck with this, things that may,
we may need to study. So we'll see where that goes. That's the one area, Derek, where I think that's the one area to watch, and much of that will depend on how the Poilievre government, if they take government, how they approach the Senate. There is a way they could provoke a fight, and that's one way to do it, would be through some wicked omnibus bills that are just enormous and have everything in them. So we'll see. I hope everybody. I think that the majority of senators are approaching this kind of concept. I think they've accepted it. They've had 6 months of expecting that they're going to be in the position of dealing with conservative legislation. I think everybody's kind of come to the idea that we need to deal in good faith. And I would hope and expect that a Poilievre government, at least in the beginning, would give the Senate the opportunity to show its colors and build confidence and trust between the Senate and a new conservative government, if that's what people in Canada want.
So before I let you go, I want to touch on kind of why you're a senator. As I've said a few times, you're the only elected senator there. Senator Simons, I thought, made a very good point that a Triple E Senate might be desirable, but a Double E Senate might be more dangerous for Western provinces like Alberta, where we have elected and effective, but not equal, where we have no, you know what, we're going to put a graphic up on the screen here showing the seat distribution in the Senate right now. Alberta has roughly, I think, twice the population of all 4 Atlantic provinces combined, yet we have just a hair over half the number of senators as just New Brunswick, just over half the number of senators as just Nova Scotia. We have only 2 more than Prince Edward Island, for God's sakes. So, every functioning federation a democratic federation in the world has some kind of upper house. In America, they're all elected and have an equal number. In Germany, they're appointed by the state lander governments, and they're not equal in number, but it is relative somewhat to population, and it's a sliding scale to give more representation to the smaller states. There's different ways to do it. Canada is the only one on the planet where there's no democratic legitimacy of any kind, with exceptions like yourself, and where bigger provinces like Alberta and BC can actually have significantly less representation in that upper house than smaller provinces like New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland. The Constitution appears to be set in stone for all time, as long as Quebec is a part of Canada. As long as Quebec is in Canada, it does not appear to have any chance of being realistically opened. And Stephen Harper had referred his Senate reform proposals, which were more modest than earlier proposals, but some modest proposals, to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court pretty much slapped them down. How do you think, if say Pierre Poilievre or hypothetically Mark Carney, I doubt he'd have an appetite for it, but either one, how do you think Canada's next prime minister should approach potential Senate reform? Do you think it should continue on the path that Justin Trudeau's put it on, or where do you think it should go?
Well, I think your first point is absolutely correct. That trying to change fundamentally anything that's laid out in the Constitution with respect to the Senate is impossible. And the Supreme Court reference that Prime Minister Harper did, where he asked a series of questions and how much provincial approvals he would need in order to make X change, Y change, etc. And practically all of them of any impact would require unanimous consent, which we're never going to get. So I think what we have to do then is really, think about, set that aside and think about how we can get the right senators in. I mean, I've kind of come to be able to rationalize the equality around the West, Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritime and the Atlantic provinces.
But the Constitution doesn't recognize these so-called regions. And even then they're asymmetrical. Like Newfoundland has a different number of senators than New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island. I mean, it seems very arbitrarily designed, almost intentionally against the West. And that's not Justin Trudeau's fault or Stephen Harper's fault. That's arguably the fathers of Confederation, who very much viewed the West as a colony at that time, and maybe some still do. I just have a hard time getting around, even if we accept an appointed Senate, I have a hard time accepting the legitimacy of the body that treats, where the West is enshrined as less than equal.
Yep. No, I understand. And I mean, be California in the United States and look at Hawaii and say it's all fair. I mean, it's not fair. It's imperfect. The House of Lords in Great Britain, I don't even know how they get the hundreds of people that they get. It seems to be on a whim. It's endless. They don't have the regional issues that we do, to be fair. But I mean, these upper houses all have differences. And to me, the one thing that I think we can, without any constitutional change, focus on is the effectiveness of the place. And that to me is important. I think we can. I think the Senate would benefit with a hybrid, where there was a percentage of senators that were elected and a percentage that were appointed. That could be something that the potentially the Supreme Court reference didn't talk about. Was, but it would have to be prime minister by prime minister deciding to do it, as opposed to anything that codified it. But
the Supreme Court said he could
do it.
Yeah, the Supreme Court strangely, I think, tried to say he pretty much couldn't appoint the elected senators from Alberta, but at the same time, nothing. You can't limit the prime minister's prerogative about who he can appoint, as long as the senators meet the criteria about land ownership and age, etc.
Exactly.
So there really was nothing it could do to stop him, but you would still require elections to be held in those areas.
I think it was a convenient excuse, and one that he was never intended to do. If he can have a consultative process like he did with these provincial boards and everybody being able to apply, and that's an area, Derek, where I think if I were Prime Minister Poilievre coming in, I would open up the idea of having people make applications. The idea that you kind of tell a few people and you play footsie and you hope that you'll get a call. I mean, the pool of talent for that is homogenous and small. And if the idea is to get some people that can add some value, business people, others that could still have your ideology, but aren't wildly active politically, but could do a good job, an opportunity to apply. That, I think, is one of the benefits of the Trudeau process, was this application process and some vetting then to winnow it down to something that a prime minister could look at.
I don't think it was a very good process. I think I actually applied as a joke once, and for reasons I don't understand, Justin Trudeau did not appoint me to the Senate representing Alberta.
Well, there is a little bit of a screen, I'm sure, and if you applied in a Poilievre government, you might get a little further up the list.
Actually, I have a less of a chance, because I think he'll appoint elected senators in Alberta. So actually, I think I had a better chance of becoming an Alberta senator under Justin Trudeau. Although I think I was born in Ontario, so maybe Poilievre can appoint me as a technically Ontario senator, and I'll just consider myself representing really Western Ontario.
There you go.
Okay. Well, Senator, thank you for your time. We'll see if I make the cut and get a Senate appointment soon and join the other media personalities who are there. Thank you very much, and wish you all the best here.
Pleasure, Derek. Take care.
All right, that's it for our show today. Thank you all for joining us. Remember, the Western Standard is one of the only media outlets left in Canada that refuses to take the Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney federal media bailout. We rely on people like you to continue our work. Please go to westernstandard.news, click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. Thank you very much, and God bless.